My role today is really to set the stage for a discussion of the emerging middle class of consumers in Asia. And I will do that over the next 15 or 18 minutes or so. And then we have a panel representing different sectors of the economy. And they will share with us their views as to how this growth of the middle class is progressing. The first thing that I would like to accomplish in the 15 minutes that I have before the panel comes on stage is to persuade you about something really important. I've been doing a lot of number crunching on this topic over the last 7 years or so, and I've reached one very important conclusion, which is that the world is coming to an end by the year 2030, if not earlier. And what I mean by that is that the world as we know it today is coming to an abrupt end, okay? And that is going to happen within the next 5 or 10 years, and I hope to be able to persuade you about that over the next few minutes. So this is the topic of the middle class. You see, in order to have a vibrant consumer market of middle class consumers, you need to have a number of things in place. You certainly need economic growth, but you also need that economic growth to be distributed more or less evenly across the population. And you also need, as I'm showing you on this map, population growth itself to slow down a little bit. Okay, so what you see on this first map is that right now most of the growth in the world, you can see that with the dark blue colors, is taking place in sub-Saharan Africa, parts of the Middle East, and parts of South Asia. So you will see in a few minutes that the highest growth rates of middle-class consumers are actually happening in other parts of the world, such as India or China, the rest of East and Southeast Asia, and also Latin America, where population growth has already started to slow down. The other very important thing that we need for the middle class to grow, as you will see in a second, is that the wealth is, the income that is generated by economic growth is distributed more or less evenly. You have here some statistics about population, GDP per capita using market exchange rates, and then GDP per capita using purchasing power parities. And then lastly, the distribution of income, the Gini coefficient, for a number of countries in this part of the world, in Asia, in the Asia-Pacific region. And I also included the United States as a reference point. And you can see that, well, there's a long way for many of the countries in the region to go in terms of per capita income. That's the next to last column. But at the same time, there's something really encouraging, which is that the Gini coefficients for income distribution are relatively low, which means that wherever economic growth is being generated in this part of the world, is being spread more or less evenly across the population. Those Gini coefficients are not growing that fast, except for China. And I would like to add, as another problem in China, which is that the model of economic growth seems to be generating a lot of inequality. You referred to the issue of differences between the cities and the countryside. And that's exactly another phenomenon that comes hand in hand with the growth of the middle class. Which is that in addition to the demographic deceleration that I was talking about earlier, you also get the growth of cities. So let me just tell you about these two issues in a second. So first is the deceleration of population growth. Here you see the classic age pyramids where you have men on the left in blue and then women on the right in red. And you have three snapshots. For those of you who are at the back of the room, maybe you cannot see it. The first snapshot is 1960. And then the second one in the middle is 2010. And the one on the right is a projection, a forecast to the year 2060. And so we see that in the US, in European countries, in China, we're seeing this deceleration of demographic growth, which is essentially providing the foundations for the growth of the middle class. We also see that in Latin America. We're starting to see that in India. We're certainly seeing that in other major economies like Mexico, Indonesia, here in Thailand, or in Malaysia, and as well in Vietnam. So this is one very important process that goes on that facilitates the growth of the middle class. The other one is the growth of cities. You see, cities are growing very fast around the world. Every week, we have about 1.5 million new urban residents somewhere in the world. Every week, 1.5 new million urban residents. And that's where the middle class grows in the cities, of course, assuming that economic conditions are evolving the right way. These are the largest cities in the world as of the year 1960. There's only two with more than 10 million people, New York and Tokyo. This is the year 1970. That's 1990. This is the situation today, where you can see that there's a lot of big cities in Latin America, in India, in China, all of Southeast Asia, and starting also in Africa. And this is the projection to the year 2030. That's the year, remember, that the world will come to an end, okay? At that point, we're going to have 50 cities in the world with more than 10 million people. You can barely see India on the map because you essentially have a lot of balloons indicating all of the big cities that will exist at that point in time in India. The same goes for China. The same goes for Thailand and Vietnam and all of the other countries in the region. So let's keep this in mind. Now, this is how fast this is growing. These are statistics and projections by Professor Honi Karas, who is at the Brookings Institution. And together with the OECD, they produce a set of estimates about the growth of the middle class in the world. And as you can see over here, the orange area today, that's the number of poor people in the world below the poverty threshold. And it's still much larger than the number of people who are middle class people in the world, which is the red area. But by the year 2022, 2024, okay, so about 6 years before the world comes to an end, for the first time in human history, we're going to have more middle class people in the world than poor people. That's going to be the first time. Now, the United States or Western Europe crossed that threshold many years ago, right? But we haven't been anywhere near that in the global economy as a whole until this recently. And this is what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that most of that growth is going to be taking place in the Asia-Pacific region. And so whereas today on this map, you can appreciate that the 28 members of the European Union plus the United States represent more than half of global middle class consumption. By the year 2025 or so in about 10 years from today, India and China are actually going to be more than half. And at that time, you will see that the projection is that the European Union and the United States are going to be less than 25%. So the world is going to change very quickly. Most of these changes have been brewing for the last 20 years or 25 years, but they're reaching critical levels right now and over the next 5 to 10 years. So this is something that is really, really important to keep in mind. Let me just give you the figures coming out of the same study. Today, middle-class consumption in the world amounts to about $21 trillion. That's a 1 followed by 12 zeros. And it's distributed in the way that you see on the first column. By the year 2030, the year that the world comes to an end, we're going to have $55 trillion worth of middle-class consumption in the world every year, right? And most of the growth, as you can see if you look down the table, is going to be taking place in the Asia-Pacific region, which is going to go from about $5 trillion of annual middle-class consumption to almost $33 trillion per year of middle-class consumption. Almost no growth in North America, that's mostly the United States. And the reason is that wherever little economic growth there is in the US now is not going towards the middle class, unfortunately. As you know, inequality is growing very quickly in the US economy. There's some growth in Europe, and I can assure you that that's not going to be in Portugal or Greece or my home country, Spain. That's mostly going to be in the emerging part of Europe, Eastern Europe, Poland, the Czech Republic, Romania, Bulgaria, and so on and so forth. Some growth in sub-Saharan Africa and some growth in Latin America. But where the action is going to be over the next 5 or 10 years as far as consumer markets are concerned is definitely going to be the Asia-Pacific region. I also want to bring to your attention, before I invite the panelists on stage, to another very important trend, which is the growth of the wealthy segment of the population around the world. What you have here on this chart is statistics, right, on the number of the so-called high net worth individuals, meaning people who have at least $1 million in investable assets. So this is no longer the middle class. This is the other segment. And as you can see on this chart, since the global economic crisis, the financial crisis in 2008, there has been an increase. And so we have about 11 or 12 million millionaires in the world, high net worth individuals. And about a third of them are here in the Asia-Pacific region. Collectively, they own in excess of $50 trillion, which have to be managed. Okay? That's another very important market that is emerging. This is the ranking by country in terms of the number of millionaires, the number of high net worth individuals. And as you can see, China has catapulted itself over the last 10 years to number 4 on the ranking. And the other big emerging economy that shows up among the top spots is Brazil at the bottom of the table over there. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that in this uppermost segment where we have essentially luxury markets, what we see is that most of these individuals who tend to be millionaires, high net worth individuals, tend to be in their 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s. They tend not to be young people, unless, of course, they're called Mark Zuckerberg or they inherit a lot of money, right? And then the other thing that I want to share with you is that increasingly in this segment of the income distribution, the wealth distribution, we find more and more and more women. These are some of the statistics that I've been able to find. Unfortunately, these surveys and the estimates are not produced every year. But apparently, it seems as if by now, 1 in 3 millionaires in the world are women, whereas 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, a very small number of women actually crossed that threshold of having at least $1 million in investable assets. And as you can see, in some parts of the world, like North America, especially the United States, or Japan, where the population is older, you actually get a much greater proportion of women who happen to be millionaires. So the trend is unmistakable in this segment of consumer markets, the luxury segment, which is that, yes, we have more millionaires in the world. Yes, they have more wealth. But in addition to that, we also have more women who are in that category. And the reasons for that are very simple. First of all, women now have education, unlike their mothers or their grandmothers. They also have jobs, but moreover, they have careers, and they accumulate their own wealth. And then, of course, the other issue is that women live longer than men, as you know. In the rich countries in the world, they live on average about 7 years. In this part of the world, the average is about 3 years. Okay? So I cannot make any promises to any particular woman in the room, but on average, you're supposed to live longer, right, than the men in the room. So this is the world we're going into. Okay? This is the other big segment that I would like to bring to your attention. So we have, again, tremendous opportunities, trillions of dollars of new consumption that are going to be generated, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, over the next 5 or 10 years. Okay? That's going to be an emerging middle-class market. And then, at the same time, we have this big increase in the number of women who are becoming millionaires because they accumulate their own wealth and also because they live longer, so they inherit wealth.